Okay, welcome to the virtual study session of the Lakewood City Council, and I will call to order this virtual study session of the Lakewood City Council on September 20th, 2021 at 7:15 p.m. Mr. Rome, will you please call the roll?
Paul. Abel.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
Gutwein. Oh, I'm sorry. Beta.
Here.
Skilling.
Here.
Springsteen.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
LeBure. Oh, that's right. Good. So Harrison. Sorry, everybody.
Here.
Okay, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rome. And thank you for all of those tuning in tonight. We do have a presentation of our proposed 2022 budget, both the city budget and the proposed 2022 Lakewood Reinvestment Authority budget. These are giant books that look like this, that the city staff works most of the year on. And all of council has received a hard copy, but also the public can go online and view the digital version of this budget at lakewood.org. And you can review the many different tabs that are in here. It breaks down each of the various departments and the proposed budget therein. And tonight we will have a presentation by somebody, but at this point I'll turn it over to Ms. Hodson.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So leading this presentation is our Chief Financial Officer, Holly Bjorklund.
Okay. Welcome, Ms. Bjorklund.
She is not here yet. I guess we're going to have to hold for a minute.
Okay. Well, I can fill some space. So lakewood.org is where you would go if you're watching us. You can actually go to the website now. It's up there now, the proposed budget. I understand, Ms. Hodson, correct me if I'm wrong.
It is. You're right.
You can actually go and look in real time at the budget. Tonight's presentation, I know we're going to try to hear from Ms. Bjorklund, Ms. Newland, our Robert Smith, our Economic Development Director. And of course, this process starts, way back when, and it also has the Budget and Audit Committee meets throughout the year to discuss a lot of these issues, and that is chaired by Councilor Beta. And throughout the night, if there's an opportunity to speak to anything that was discussed at the committee, that would be great. But this is a collaborative effort, both by the staff and all the various departments, but also by other counselors, including Mr. Beta's committee. Councilor Franks.
I just want to help people locate it. If you just go to lakewood.org/finance, you're going to land on the finance. And then after you land on the finance page, there's a blue section called budgets. Expand that, and then you'll see the proposed budget. So I just wanted to kind of help people get there rather than maybe using search.
There also is a public input portion of the study session tonight. That public number, the phone number, this is published on the agenda. So if you forget or don't write down what I'm saying, this is published on the top of the agenda, I believe. The phone number for tonight is 253-215-8782. with a webinar ID of 950-3326-8279. And you will press *9 to speak. That will raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute when you're prompted. Again, that telephone number, 253-215-8782.
Oh. Apologize.
So that is the phone number, and it's slightly different than our regular meetings. The public input is strictly on the topic at hand, which is the proposed budget, and we will do that towards the end of the meeting. So Ms. Hodson, do you want to maybe just take somebody out of turn, or how would you like me to approach it?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I am texting with Holly and she's not able to join the meeting, but I don't see her even in that backup room. So I'm not sure what's happening here. You know what? She just made it. She made it as an attendee. So Bruce, if you could forward her as a panelist, then we can get started with the presentation. And voila, phew, she's here.
Right on time.
Phew.
Ms. Bjorklund, thank you.
Oh.
Welcome.
Can you see me? Let's see.
So, Holly, hold on a minute. Zoom is being really weird tonight, and you should.
There she is.
There you
Okay.
are. We've got you. Sound and video.
I
Wonderful.
wasn't able to get in.
Okay, so we'll tee it up again. This is Holly Bjorklund, our Chief Financial Officer for the City of Lakewood. She is going to start us off in tonight's study session.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for waiting. I had a hard time getting in. While Bruce is pulling up the presentation, I'll go ahead and get started. This is our second year of budgeting while experiencing the economic effects of the pandemic. Staff from every department have worked hard to propose a meaningful and realistic 2022 budget. We collaboratively evaluated ways to sustain the city's financial health. Additionally, throughout the past year, staff continued to diligently reduce expenses through creative solutions. This budget presentation is a financial reflection of, there it is, of the community's priorities and a collaborative effort of City Council, staff, and community members to develop a plan that continues to provide quality programs and services for the community. Next slide, please. So today, we'll be reviewing the city manager's proposed 2021 revised and 2022 budget. Last Wednesday, September 15th, the Budget and Audit Board discussed this proposed budget. The first public hearing will be on October 11th and the second on October 25th. So next slide, please. What we'll be covering tonight is city budgeting, proposed 2021 revised and 2022 budget, total city budget, general, capital, and Tabor funds, department updates, and then Robert Smith is going to cover the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. So next slide. And we'll be starting with the city budgeting. Next slide. So here are some Lakewood facts that may be of interest to you and your constituents if you decide to share this presentation. The items to note about these facts are the changes from year to year. The circles represent a comprehensive comparison from July 2021 to July 2020. For example, if you see, as you can see, the average household income has gone up 5%, and the average housing price has gone up 9%, and the average monthly housing rent has gone up 3%, which indicates that the purchasing of a home is outpacing the average income increases and average renting costs. The population has increased 1% and has been leveling off in recent years. This is one indication that Lakewood has moved from being a growth city to an established city. The population in the labor force has declined a little, and the median age has gone down 1%. As you probably know, prior to the pandemic, the regional unemployment rate was a historically low rate of 3%. The rate of unemployment increased regionally during the pandemic and peaked at 12% in May of 2020. The July 2021 unemployment rate still remains elevated at 6%. However, businesses and the city of Lakewood are facing the challenges of hiring skilled workers and filling critical roles to operate. The last item to note is the commercial vacancy rate has gone down since last year. Next slide. Now we'll be talking about the budget process. As you can see on this slide, for the budget process, we first start with the community's priorities. Okay. And then we analyze, stay on the process one, please. And then we analyze the different parts of the budget, starting with the estimated revenue, the priorities, prioritizing our expenses, evaluate fund balances, and budget by fund. As I mentioned earlier, the gathering of the information also includes the input of City Council, staff, and community members. This process is facilitated by the Budget Administrator, Ryan Diamond. I'd like to recognize Ryan for his dedication to completing a comprehensive proposed budget and managing an effective and efficient budget process. I'd also like to give an additional thank you to the City Manager, the department directors, and the staff. There are many hours dedicated to the budget process to ensure collaboration and effective teamwork to create a budget that is sustainable and is focused on providing quality programs and services to the community. Staff and I look forward to your questions and your input on the proposed budget. So next we're talking about the proposed 2021 revised and 2022 budget. The total city view will be covered first, and then the general capital and Tabor fund. Okay, so Lakewood has 17 different funds, and they are grouped in 5 types. The largest fund is the general fund, which can be used for any purpose. Capital project funds, which is specifically for acquisitions or construction and maintenance of capital facilities and other assets. The 2 capital project funds we have are Capital Improvement and Equipment Replacement Fund. Enterprise Funds is a government-owned business that has no more than 10% state or local government funding. Lakewood has the golf course, the 3 utility funds, sewer, stormwater, and water. Special revenue funds are restricted funds allocated to discrete purposes. Lakewood has the Grant, Tabor, Open Space, Conservation Trust, Heritage, Culture and Arts, and the Economic Development Funds. Internal service funds are used to account for costs that are shared or allocated across multiple departments, and funds such as medical, dental, and other insurance-related costs. Next slide, please. Next, we'll be talking about the revenue by fund type for the total city. The first bar shows you 2019 actuals. Then we have 2020 actuals, the 2021 adopted budget, 2021 revised budget, and the 2022 proposed budget. For the general fund, we are, which are the blue bars, you can see the decline in revenue from 2019 actuals to 2020 actuals of approximately $9 million, which is actually better than the forecasted decline. This was primarily due to the sales tax recovering more quickly than estimated. You can also see the general fund 2021 revised budget is approximately $21 million higher than the 2021 adopted budget. This is primarily due to receiving funds of $10.8 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, an estimated $10.2 million recovery of sales tax. The proposed 2022 general fund revenue is approximately the same as 2021 revenue because we expect to have the second half of the American Rescue Plan Act fund of $10.8 million and sales tax is forecasted to maintain at the higher level, but not estimated to continue to grow beyond the 2019 level. The capital fund, which are the red bars, have continued on the same sales tax trend as the general fund. The enterprise funds, which are the green bars, have stayed approximately the same. For the special revenue funds, which are the yellow bars, you can see an uptick in 2020 actuals due to the $12.3 million for the CARES Act. 2021 has also revised up from the run rate for large grants such as the Colfax Safety Project for Public Works. As you can see, Lakewood is receiving several one-time funds. The CARES funds were spent in 2020, and the remaining of the funds are forecasted to be spent over several years. This slide displays how all city funds are spent by department. What is included in all other departments, which is the orange area, is mayor, council, city manager's office, city clerk, city attorney, finance, HR, municipal courts, and planning. Each individual department in all other is less than 3% of the total spending. Non-departmental includes citywide employee benefits, debt obligations, special projects, and self-insurance funding. You can also see each color for the department has a shaded area. The shaded area is non-personnel, and the non-shaded area is personnel expense. One item to note is although police, public works, and community resources are all approximately a fourth of the total spending, the distribution of personnel and non-personnel is quite different. You can see police is mostly personnel, public works mostly non-personnel, and community resources is approximately half and half. Next slide, please. Staffing is continually being assessed and evaluated. With maintaining such a large number of unfunded positions, it was determined that staffing had become too lean. The proposed budget includes adding back resources to provide more support for core services to residents. The police department attrition will continue to be backfilled through police academy recruits, with class sizes varying due to the level of attrition. The proposed budget has a request to fund 13 existing unfunded positions. There's also a request for 2 new positions for body-worn cameras and 2 positions for traffic infrastructure for public works, which will be funded by the Tabor Fund. There's a request for 1 position for a neighborhood support team funded by the General Fund, 2 positions for sidewalk improvement from the Capital Fund, and 1 position for an ADA compliance from the Workers' Compensation Fund. A conservative position is still being maintained to retain 35.5 unfunded positions to ensure that the city is only adding back resources that are essential to the services provided. Lakewood used the 2020 reduction in resources as an opportunity to reevaluate what was truly needed to provide core services to Lakewood residents. Additionally, with the unknown factors in the economic continued effects of the pandemic, it is important to remain flexible with staffing. It is also recommended a 3% COLA increase in Q4 2021 and a 3% merit increase in Q2 of 2022 for existing staff. Next slide, please. Now we have covered the total city review. We are going to talk about the general fund. The general fund serves as the city's primary operating fund and accounts for ordinary operations, financed from taxes and general revenues. First, let's discuss our budget realities for the general fund. In 2020, the city made a $17 million reduction from expenses for the 2020 and 2021 budgets due to the pandemic. This year, we have a short-term inflow of one-time funds, the American Rescue Plan Act from the federal government, and a return of ongoing revenue, in which sales tax is returning to the 2019 levels. This is good news. However, in the long term, we are still seeing financial challenges. Although revenue is returning to the 2019 levels, we are not seeing indications that it will grow in future years. Additionally, starting in 2026, revenue over the Tabor limit will be returning to the taxpayers and no longer be funding parklands, infrastructure, and police expenses. Both of these create a revenue expense gap since community needs are expected to continue to grow and the city's infrastructure will continue to age. Lakewood will continue to evaluate the current revenue sources and potential changes for the potential change for the future to sustain city's financial health while providing core services to residents. In the short term, the American Rescue Plan Act revenue is being used for revenue replacement. As mentioned earlier, Lakewood received $10.8 million in 2021 and will receive $10.8 million in 2022. As the staff reviewed the needs of the city and what can be supported by ongoing revenue, it became clear that infrastructure maintenance and replacement has been unfunded historically, and current ongoing revenue is not expected to grow enough to meet these needs. It was then identified the largest need for serving the community is to utilize these one-time funds in infrastructure maintenance and replacement. On the slide, you will see the recommended use of these funds, as well as an additional $10 million investment that is recommended to be funded by General Fund 2020 expense savings. These additional savings above the $17 million reductions were due to additional pandemic restrictions and the diligence of staff to continue to find creative ways to reduce expenses. The projects are deferred maintenance and equipment replacement, sidewalk construction and maintenance, finance and HR system replacement, maintenance campus modifications and rehab, radio system upgrades and equipment replacement, civic center fire and safety improvements, and miscellaneous. The items in miscellaneous include video camera infrastructure, homeless navigator vehicles, renewable energy study for city buildings, budget resiliency planning project, and ADA compliance. These are all add up to an investment of $30.7 million and are proposed to be invested over a 5-year period. This investment will provide some catch-up on maintenance, maintaining the services the city provides today. It gives a little breathing room for the long-term revenue expense gap, which will give the city time to thoughtfully address the long-term challenges. In the regular budget, there are a few one-time items for sustainability, which is $250,000 for tree canopy, $100,000 for sustainability study, and $600,000 for the Flash program with Jeffco. The other requests on sustainability that were discussed last Monday night, including a sustainable plan update, energy and water efficiency, and public electric vehicle charging, will be brought back to you at another date once they have been studied a little further. Now we'll talk about some of the items that contribute to Lakewood's experiencing a flattening and potential declining of sales tax. As I mentioned, we are seeing a return of sales tax back to 2019 levels, but we're not seeing an indication of continued growth. There are a number of factors driving this decline in growth, including consumers shifting to online shopping, consumers purchasing more untaxed services than tax goods, Lakewood becoming an established city, the city's relatively low sales tax rate, and lack of diversity in the type of sales tax. If Lakewood does find ways to expand the current revenue sources and find new revenue options, Tabor creates an additional limitation for this revenue. For the general fund, we are forecasting revenue to grow at 1.8% in future years. We're expecting property tax, use tax, and business and occupation tax to grow by 5 to 7% per year. However, sales tax is expected to only grow at 0.6% after getting back to the 2019 levels. Because the sales tax in the city and in the general fund in particular make up such a large portion of revenue, this declining growth in sales tax brings down the overall expected revenue growth to 1.8% starting in 2022 and future years. Expense needs are forecasted at 2.2% in future years based on revenue estimates, but we expect the needs to be at least a minimum of 3% growth. Revenue that is collected over the Tabor limit will be returned to the taxpayers starting in 2026. For the capital fund, we are forecasting revenue to grow at 1.3% in future years. Of this, we expect the sales tax to grow 0.6%. For the capital improvement fund, the replacement, maintenance, and debt have become a larger portion of using revenue every year. This limits the use of capital funds for new projects. You can see on this slide the capital improvement fund outlook for ongoing revenue and expense. This bar chart reflects 2021 revised, 2022 proposed, and 2023 through 2026 forecasts for ongoing revenue, the blue bars, and replacement, maintenance, and debt expense, yellow bars. This does not include the expense for new projects. In 2022 is an unusual year, but the items to note on this slide is how little is available in ongoing revenue for new projects due to the increased costs of maintaining existing infrastructure and the lack of revenue growth. Additionally, starting in 2025, it is forecasted that maintaining existing infrastructure will exceed the revenue and there will be no funds for new projects. Next slide, please. In the past year, City Council and the Budget and Audit Board started reviewing and addressing the long-term challenges. This slide summarizes what was addressed in 2020 and 2021. The municipal tax code was revised to simplify taxation for businesses. Tax exemptions, licensing, and retail marijuana were also reviewed. Lakewood will continue to evaluate the current revenue sources and potential changes for the future to sustain the city's financial health while continuing to provide core services to the residents. This slide shows the distribution of general fund revenue by type of revenue for the 2022 budget. Most of these groupings are clear as to what they include. The one that is not clear is intergovernmental, which includes state and federal funding. This is where the American Rescue Act funds are placed. And other includes fine, forfeit, and investment income. Sales and use tax revenue for 2022 are expected to be 58% of all revenue, intergovernmental revenue 12%, property 9%, charges for services 8%, franchisees 4%, and all other 9%. This donut gives you a visual display of how much sales and use tax dominates the total revenue for the general fund and why the revenue growth is being pulled down by the estimated low sales tax growth. Next slide, please. This slide shows the economic forecast of sales tax growth from the Office of State Planning and Budgeting, the Colorado Legislative Council, and the City of Lakewood. Just a reminder, the state's fiscal year is July to June, and the City of Lakewood follows a calendar year. You can see from these three forecasts, they are all in the same range for 2020, 2021 for the state, and Lakewood calendar year 2020-2021. The range is 6.9% to 8.4%. We see a disconnect in the future forecast between all three of them. This is partly an indication of the uncertainty of the future impact of the pandemic. The Office of State Planning and Budgeting is forecasting a growth of 5.9% in 2021 to 2022. The Colorado Legislative Council is forecasting 2.2% growth in the same time period, and Lakewood is forecasting a 0.6% growth for the calendar year 2022. For Lakewood, the driver of the significant drop in growth from 2021 to 2022 is in 2021 sales tax. It's forecasted to get back to the 2019 levels. But in 2022, there is little indication there will be future growth due to the factors discussed earlier on long-term challenges. In comparing to the state forecast, please keep in mind the state has a different makeup of the taxes they collect, and they are looking at a different time period. This comparison is to give you other data points, not to say that the City of Lakewood should have the same forecast. For this slide, let's look at the pie chart first. The inside percentages shows you the makeup of our sales tax. For example, beside all other, the largest groupings are restaurants, electronic shopping, and department stores. The outside percentages are the changes from July 2021 compared to July 2020. This shows the sales are down for car dealerships and telecommunications, and sales are up for all other categories. The large growth areas are electronic shopping, hotels, department stores, home improvements, and all other, which are the areas you would expect to see improvement. On the left-hand side of the slide, you will see the month-by-month comparison for 2021 versus 2020 year to date. You can see that the first 2 months of the year, we were still showing a decline. This time period was pre-COVID for 2020. Then in March, sales started to show an increase compared to last year. Year to date, we are up 16% and $7.8 million compared to 2020. You can see that the increase peaked in May and has started to come back down. This puts us at a trend of 7.5% total year increase over 2020 and close to the 2019 levels. Next slide, please. This slide gives you an example of property tax for a home valued at $350,000. As you can see, the city gets the smallest portion of this revenue, which is 5%. Property tax revenues are the second largest source of ongoing income for the city and are projected to be $12.7 million in 2022, an increase of 8.2% over the 2021 adopted budget. This graph shows you the 2020 actuals, the 2021 adopted budget, the 2021 revised budget, 2022 proposed budget and the 2023 through 2026 forecast for general fund revenue net of the Tabor limit. The blue bars show you the current revenue sources and the green show the American Rescue Funds. The 2021 revised revenue is expected to increase by $24.5 million from the 2021 adopted budget. This is due to the receipt of the $10.8 million from the American Rescue Funds and recovery from the pandemic in other revenues, primarily sales tax. 2022 revenue is forecasted to be approximately the same as 2021 of $137.3 million due to receiving the second payment of the American Rescue Act and expecting minimal growth in revenue. You can see in the out years, the expectation of minimal growth continues. This slide shows the general fund expenses for 2020 actuals, 2021 adopted budget, 2021 revised, and 2022 proposed budget, which are the blue bars. The green bars show the one-time projects and investment. Previously, I shared the full amount of the investment for one-time projects is $30.7 million. This is proposed to be invested over 5 years. This amount, $1.5 million is proposed for 2021, $19.7 million in 2022 from the general fund. For the general fund balance, this is showing 2020 actuals, 2021 adopted budget, 2021 revised, 2022 proposed budget, and forecasts for 23 through 26. If you remember from last year, we were expecting the fund balance to decline in the 2021 adopted budget. However, as we have discussed, revenue started to recover quicker than we expected in 2020, and the 2020 expenses were lower than planned due to the continued pandemic restrictions and staff diligently finding creative ways to lower expenses. This reset the starting point of 2020 fund balance to $41.3 million. The additional fund balance in 2021 revised budget is primarily due to the American Rescue Plan Act. As we discussed earlier, we expect revenue to have minimal growth of 1.8%, but expect forecasted growth of expenses to grow at 2.2% to 3%. Therefore, over time, we see the fund balance starting to decline, and we will partially be using it for operations. The one-time funds received will give the city time to address the long-term challenges. Now we'll talk about Tabor, otherwise known as the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. Tabor is a Colorado constitutional amendment that limits government revenue increases to inflation plus a small growth factor. Here is the calculation. CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, includes common consumer spending items such as fuel, clothing, food, housing, etc., or you could call it inflation. You add that to local growth, which includes only new construction, and the two of those together are the allowable growth of the Tabor limit. Tabor requires two limit calculations: overall revenue and property tax. In 2018, voters elected to allow the city to keep revenue collected in excess of the Tabor limit through 2025. By voting to temporarily lift the limit, taxpayers enabled the city to direct Tabor funds dollars to three priority areas. A separate fund has been identified to detail how all Tabor dollars will be spent. There were funds specifically identified for new park acquisitions, and each year the new funds are split in thirds between parks, police, and transportation infrastructure. Next slide. This shows what was historically refunded and what was transferred to the Tabor Fund. Tabor funds will go back to the taxpayer as of 2026, and we will need to identify other funding sources for these programs. So the blue bars are what was went back to the taxpayer, and the orange bars are what was kept by the city. Next slide. Here are the current Tabor projects. This list is periodically updated on the Lakewood website and is located on the same page as the budget. Next slide. Now, a few departments will share details on the projects the staff have been working on and what is proposed in this budget. Before I turn it over to the department directors, I'm going to briefly talk about a new program that is being proposed in the budget. Next slide, yeah. With the pandemic, people working from home and other strains in society, Lakewood is looking for ways to promote positive resident interaction and relations with each other and local government. With this in mind, the city is proposing a new group called the Neighborhood Support Team to help support local residents and encourage positive interactions between neighbors. This will be a community-focused team in the planning department. They will get to know the neighborhoods, attend ward meetings, community events, and help to identify issues. The focus will be working with neighbors to resolve disputes before they rise to the level of code enforcement. This is a low-cost program. The plan is to start with a small team of 1 to 3 people. The long-term vision includes multiple teams, including volunteer support that could help with small community-based projects. I'll now turn it over to Jay Hutchinson and the Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Ms. Bjorklund, and good evening, City Council. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some capital improvement projects. We'll get out of the numbers for a few minutes. And I'll begin, I think, with some of the projects that have been completed recently. And on the next slide, what you will see are some of those major projects. And by recently, I mean essentially since this meeting was held a year ago. So these projects may have been under construction a year ago, but have been completed since then. I suspect that many of you are aware of each of these, including the Sheridan path from 6th to 10th on the west side, a path from going west, essentially from the Lamar station on the south side of 13th. The extension of the W line path between Wadsworth and Zephyr was completed, as were some traffic signal pole replacements on Girton and Yale. And I would like to mention that these projects were primarily funded with city capital improvement funds, but there were also 4 grants involved in these 4 projects, equating to nearly $2.9 million. On the next slide, you'll see some of the projects that are currently under construction. In one case, at least, it's not very apparent out in the world, but utility work has begun. The first group are paths and sidewalks. Next slide. And on this includes the W line work between Oak and Kipling. This is from the Oak Street station running east to Kipling, next to the W line. There's a project on Wadsworth Boulevard on the east side, south of Mansfield, that will stretch down to almost the city limit, down to about Quincy, when some work is also done by a developer. The third project listed here is a connection to Lakewood High School from the North 6th Avenue frontage road. It's on the west side of Independence Street. It's under construction, as is the First Avenue sidewalk between Garrison and Creighton Middle School. That's on the south side of First Avenue. In this case, city Tabor funds and city capital improvement funds have been used, and a grant for about $435,000. Next slide. We've also had some traffic signal work under construction, currently under construction. One is a brand new signal. That's at the location of Florida and Union Boulevard. There's a new pedestrian signal crossing under construction at Union Boulevard and what's called Steary Lane. Steary Lane is actually a private street. It's the first one north of Cedar Avenue. And then finally, as a replacement project, there's a traffic signal at Jewel and Frame that you may remember. Actually, one of the poles fell down. Fortunately, no one was injured and no private property damage at all. But that's also being reconstructed as part of our traffic signal replacement program. We go on to the next slide. We'll see some projects that the design is currently underway. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. This is the correct one. There will be some projects starting in construction yet this year and into 2022. This includes projects that you've probably already heard something about, but the construction is now imminent. One is to add a southbound to eastbound left turn lane from Kipling Parkway onto US 285. The initial motor vehicle access to Peakview Park from Wadsworth will be constructed. I'll touch on this here again in a minute, but this initial access will allow development of the park to begin. And that's right at the Morrison Road location on the east side of Wadsworth Tower. There's an existing pedestrian crossing signal at 20th and Urban Street. We've been studying it, recognizing that it was nearing its end of life as well, and getting public input. The signal actually is not in a great place. It's hardly ever used, which generates inattentiveness by drivers, by motorists. It's just a natural human reaction. And the pedestrians actually cross at a different location. So that one's going to be modified in location and probably will not include a full traffic signal, or I'm sorry, a pedestrian traffic signal. There are local drainage improvements in Applewood near 20th Avenue. Actually, it's near where that pedestrian crossing is located. And then there's a water line loop that's needed near 20th Avenue and Fenton Street. These projects are funded by multiple sources, the city's capital improvement funds and the city Tabor funds, as well as two of the utilities, the city's water utility and stormwater utility. There's also one grant for about $500,000 that's contributing to these projects. The next slide has a list of projects that are currently under design, and it begins with the Wadsworth Boulevard Morrison Road intersection area. I mentioned earlier access to Peakview Park. This would be completion of that access as well as some other improvements. Those other improvements will include a shared use path on the east side of Wadsworth from the south end of the Green Gables development down to the southern city boundary at Vassar. Would also extend the third northbound and third southbound lanes farther south to a point south of Morrison Road. The next group is paths and sidewalks. There are several here. One's on the south side of Alameda from Kipling to Garrison. And another piece on Sheridan. This is further south in the city from Florida down to Iowa. And then on the W line, there's a project from the Garrison Station east to Estes Street. There's a lengthy sidewalk area on 20th Avenue from about 11,000 West 20th to Nelson Street. There'll be some drainage improvements included with that project as well. The next group are traffic signals, mostly replacements under the program that I mentioned earlier, the City Council funded beginning a few years ago. Several along Kipling at Federal Center Gate 1. That's the entrance to the Federal Center off Kipling, just north of Alameda. And then at 8th Place, 13th Avenue and 13th Place. The two at 13th are north and south of the W line. Alameda Beach will be replaced, as will 20th and Teller, which is a very old signal, and Union, Mississippi. 14th and Carr is a little different as it was being evaluated for replacement. We discovered that it actually would be served better at that intersection by a four-way stop sign, stop condition, a stop sign on each of the four legs. So that'll be moving forward as well. The next one that's listed is the Colfax Avenue water line replacement. And that, of course, is a water utility project between Pierce and Sheridan. That's one of the older lines in the system. There will be other replacements coming. They're in the wings. Some of the pipelines are almost as old as the Colfax line, so you'll see that in future years. And then finally, in the North Dry Gulch project, which you are all familiar with, a very large project, generally paralleling Colfax Avenue. And that one is moving forward as well with design. As you might guess, funding is from multiple sources, including city capital improvement funds and city Tabor funds, and then two of the utilities, the stormwater management utility and the water utility. There are 6 different grants involved in these projects, equating to approximately $7 million. Then the next slide is new projects. And by that, I mean they're new to the Capital Improvement Preservation Program. They're shown for the first time in this year's proposed budget. The first is actually an old one that's coming back. That's the Sidewalk and Path project. You may recall that the City Council in past years has funded that at about $500,000 per year in recent years. However, with the COVID impacts last year, it was truncated and went to zero. With the one-time money that Ms. Bjorklund mentioned, that's going to be resurrected and funded through the 2026 year and equates to about $7.5 million over that period of time. The next project is on Sheridan. This is from Iowa to Jewel. You may remember that I mentioned a moment ago, Florida to Iowa. This will finish that southern portion of the gap on the Sheridan Path and expand it to be appropriate from Iowa, actually all the way from Florida to Jewel. These two projects will be combined. The next project is a rehabilitation project. There are a number of bridges around Lakewood. They're evaluated biannually by CDOT's consultant or by CDOT, and they make recommendations. We make many of the repairs or adjustments or rehabilitation with in-house staff, but there's some work that we're not really capable of doing adequately or frequently enough to make it worthwhile and efficient. So we'll hire a contractor to make those repairs. That's about $1 million project. The next item is also a replacement of network switches. These are the switches that are similar to your routers in your home for your computer systems. And they gather information at traffic signal locations, convert those from electronic signals to light so that they can be sent over the fiber optic cables, and they're coordinated and sent back to the central computer. And then the reverse occurs as well as information is sent out to modify the signal operations. These switches also serve a number of the cameras that the police department and the public works department uses. There are, I believe it's 147 network switches that are due to be replaced. Most of them are old enough that we can't even get software patches anymore at this stage. The final new project also is a replacement. We have a fuel station, a major fuel station for the city vehicles and equipment at the city shops up off of Quail near 10th. And that system is old. It actually runs on a Windows 7 computer. It can't run on anything more modern. So it's time to replace that system. We'll also add a fuel site at the Urban Park site down off of Estes Street south of Yale. This will reduce the amount of travel folks from that shop have to incur in order to get fueled up for their days of work. We'll also update the Bear Creek Lake Park fuel site. So this will be a multi-location update and replacement. In summary on this sheet, you'll see that 2 of these are new improvements, but 3 of them are really rehabilitation and replacement. And that's kind of the nature of the capital program, as Ms. Bjorklund mentioned earlier. So that's a little bit of an update on progress, things that are underway, and new projects that are proposed in the budget. And with that, I will introduce Ms. Kit Newland, who is the Director of the Community Resources Department. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kit Newland, Director of Community Resources. Thank you, Mr. Hutchison. I'll be doing, like Jay just did, updating you on projects that we've completed since last year, this time. Also giving you an update on projects that are underway and some new projects as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with these building infrastructure improvements, which Holly mentioned. And I'll just go through these quickly. We are reaching end of life on a lot of our infrastructure in our buildings. And so we'll be replacing the elevators, which is one area that is desperately in need. We have 6 elevators in the Civic Center complex that need replacing. This will include mechanical, motors, hydraulics, fluid systems, electrical, new fire systems, and upgrading all the panels. Next, we'll be replacing the garage fire system. Again, this is a system that's been in place for many, many years, and it's getting more and more difficult to maintain. So we'll be replacing that system. In 2019, the city conducted a security assessment of the Civic Center complex and several areas where staff have face-to-face interactions with customers were identified to be security risks. And as a result, we've been looking at making replacements. We've already made improvements to the permit counter, the HR front desk, and the finance front desk. And this 2022, we'll be making the improvements, the security improvements at the city clerk's office. And then we'll be putting in security gates on both the first and the second floor hallways at the South Civic Center building. And then lastly, the retaining wall. This is our largest investment. The retaining wall at the maintenance campus, at Quail Maintenance Campus, the retaining wall is failing completely. This is a very important wall for snowplow charging and for just the safety of operations over there. So the big focus will be on replacing that wall so the snowplows can recharge well and so that there aren't any safety risk on that campus. We'll also be purchasing 2 new generators. One will be as a backup for fleet and the other one as a backup for streets, so that in case of emergency operations, their operations will not be impacted. Next slide, please. And earlier on, Holly mentioned these 2 sustainability projects. I'll just talk a little bit more about them. And you did hear a little about the tree canopy project from Jonathan and Caitlin a couple of weeks ago when they did their update. Of course, our goal for the city is to get to a 30% tree canopy. We currently think that we're between 14 and 20%. The numbers vary depending on who is doing the measuring. So one of the things that we want to do first in addressing this is to get an analysis, a very detailed analysis done through a GIS system that will really tell us all the details that we need to know about the tree canopy so we can begin to address the issues. The biggest issue that we'll be facing in the next few years is the emerald ash borer. This issue is going to involve helping our residents eliminate ash trees that are in very poor condition, as well as helping them to treat the ash trees that are in good condition so that they can withstand the impact of EAB. So that is going to be a big impact to helping our tree canopy over the long haul. The second phase will be helping our residents to plant new trees of approved species, of course, and we'll be doing a lot of outreach throughout this entire process. And we'll use the data that we collect in order to analyze the areas of the city where the tree canopy is lacking and also where there are heavy amounts of ash trees that need to be treated or removed. The second big project is the slash facility. We're one of 8 Jeffco communities that is participating in contributing financially to implementing, setting up a new slash facility on Rooney Road. So the contribution amounts vary depending on populations of the cities, and our contribution is estimated to be around $600,000. Next slide, please. On August 25th, we were very excited to do the dedication for our new park, Cottage Park, which is located at 110 South Cody Street. We had a great turnout for the celebration, and we had a really awesome participation previous to this in the planning and design of this park. In addition to a playground and a shelter, this new park also has Lakewood's first labyrinth. Since we opened, we also added a labyrinth to Chester Portsmouth Park as a result of an NPP project. Next slide, please. We also just celebrated in the last couple weeks the grand opening of our Caretakers Cottage at Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. This building is an important structure in the May Bonfils Historic District within Lakewood's 20th Century Park and Museum. The cottage features an exhibition and a research room where visitors can use the museum to do online searchable database, to search on online databases, look at photos, archives, and 3D artifacts on request. Other historical programs and research tools are also available. Next slide. Earlier this year, we completed the renovation of 2 tennis facilities at Foothills Park and Lakewood Estates. Next slide. Early August, we celebrated the grand opening of a very beautifully renovated Westland Park at 1690 Owen Street. This project was funded with the combination of an NPP project, as well as open space funds. Next slide. And we've been working for a couple of years now on planning and design of the improvements to the Bear Creek Greenbelt. This is a very large project, which we are using about 2.7 of our Tabor funds. In addition to that, we're using, we got a grant from a Land and Water Conservation Fund for $750,000, and we got a very generous grant from Jeffco Open Space for $1.9 million. And together, this project will be able to do a lot of these safety improvements that are needed along the Greenbelt Trail. There's a lot of sightline problems here, and that's one of the main goals of this project. In addition, we'll be replacing concrete in bad areas along the trail and realigning the trail where needed for better sightline. And also we'll be replacing a parallel trail it'll be a soft surface trail for runners and walkers. And then there's a bridge replacement, and also restrooms will be added at the Stone House. Next slide. We're also well underway with our planning. As Jay mentioned, at Peakview Park, we recently received the CDOT access permit approval for temporary access and for development there. We're very excited about how quickly the plans are moving forward. We have soft surface and hard surface trail conceptual designs completed, and we are working on a timeline that will open up the park to the public in second quarter of 22. Next slide. Another big project that is just about ready to get started is at Addenbrooke Park. Addenbrooke was dedicated in 1986, and it needs some infrastructure care. This project will include a new irrigation system and pond edge renovation for the big pond out there. This project is funded through open space and conservation trust funds. Next slide. And some new projects. We just put out to bid a new playground. This is what the playground will look like at Morris Park. We're expecting that construction to begin in the next few weeks and hopefully be completed before year's end when the bad weather comes in. This project was funded completely through CDBG. Next slide, please. And I wanted to update you on our Tabor fund utilization. As you remember, we have Tabor funds both for park improvements as well as acquisitions. We'll be using our Tabor funds in the next year through 23 on Bear Creek Greenbelt Trail and Peakview Park. And then our acquisition funds have been used for 3 important acquisitions so far. The Totive property, which adds to Walker Branch, the Armstrong property, which is an addition to Bear Creek Greenbelt. And then we purchased a car wash property at 1080 Wadsworth, that car wash, of course, will be demoed, and that will be an addition to Two Creeks Park. Next slide, please. And these parks that I just mentioned are also two of them, Walker Branch and Two Creeks, are going to be on our list for future planning. In 2022, we'll be doing site plans for both Walker Branch and Two Creeks. as well as for Wright Street Park, which is located at 500 Wright Street. We're looking forward, that's a 10-acre site, so it'll be a pretty robust process, and we're looking forward to working with that community to plan that site. Next slide, please. Oh, lastly, before I introduce our CIO, there were some questions that came up during the Budget and Audit Board meeting last Wednesday, and I wanted to address them, and it was in regards to Lakewood rides. The questions were, I'll go through them. There were 3 separate questions. One was, what is the reason for cutbacks in Lakewood ride services? Aside from COVID restrictions, the biggest challenge in providing Lakewood rides has been our finding part-time staff, part-time drivers. This is not an unusual problem. It's become a big problem for us in many of our service areas, finding part-time staff. So the COVID restrictions were a big limitation for us in 2020, and we did see a reduction in the number of rides we were able to offer. However, that was not intentional. In 2021, staff are continuing to work on trying to attain what was historically the number of one-way trips, which was around 22,000 per year, as opposed to the 18,000 they were able to complete in 2020. The other question was in regards to funding of Lakewood rides, and there have been no changes to funding in Lakewood rides. We continue to access funds through Title III and the Older Americans Act. Those come through DRCOG. We also are continuing to search for other funding whenever that might be available to try to stretch those dollars that we already get as far as we can to continue to provide this important service to the community. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alina Walters, CIO. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newland, and good evening, Mayor, Council, and all. I have a couple of slides to share with you tonight and would like to start by first highlighting a few stories of our city's resilience as we maneuvered the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. As you'll recall, one of the first challenges that we faced at the onset of the pandemic in March of 2020 was the need to shift to a remote work structure, and in parallel to offer our community uninterrupted services, inclusive of holding the then imminent March 23rd council meeting. Well, not only did the March 23rd meeting go on as scheduled, but more importantly, it did so without a disruption to our residents and community members, thanks to the support that you provided to quickly transition to a 100% virtual meeting in a matter of days. And since then, you have continued to support your community in this manner, meeting more than 60 times virtually during the course of the past 18 months. Our municipal court staff were also quick adopters of remote work technologies, and most notably, the court successfully transitioned to offering 100% of their services online in a very short amount of time. This transition allowed court operations to continue uninterrupted, and in some cases, even improve the end user's experience through the more easily accessible methods of conducting court business virtually. And the community resources team was also very creative and successful in providing a variety of their programs and activities online, helping to keep our community healthy and engaged during this very turbulent period. Again, these are only a few of many examples of resilience across the city, but I hope you will agree that they are a powerful representation of your and our staff's strength during these unprecedented times. Next slide, please. As we continue to acclimate to this ever-changing technology and business landscape, the federal funds discussed by Ms. Bjorklund provide us with a tremendous opportunity to replace the city's end-of-life and also inefficient technology infrastructure with more effective and secure solutions. That said, our 3 major technology-focused initiatives outlined in the 2022 budget include Number one, implementing a new business management solution that will meet the city's evolving financial and human resources operational needs, and which will replace multiple outdated systems and manual processes. Number two, upgrading our end-of-life public safety radio system to ensure continuity of operations. And number three, enhancing the city's video surveillance camera infrastructure to meet the growing demands for storage capacity. Leveraging this one-time funding opportunity allows us to address critical issues that will make us more efficient and effective as a city. For example, with a modern financial and HR management solution, we will increase cross-city productivity, improve transparency and insight into HR and finance information, and provide staff with the flexibility needed to support the demands arising from the city's rapidly changing needs. Furthermore, the upgrade of our radio system, which also includes replacing the current fleet of aging handheld radios in use since 2012 with new equipment, will ensure continuity of vendor support and uninterrupted operations for our public safety staff. And last, the upgrade of our video surveillance camera infrastructure will ensure that the increased demand for video storage from added security cameras is met through appropriate capacity, retention, and ease of access capabilities. And so in closing, as we continue to maneuver the pandemic's lasting impacts, these one-time initiatives will ensure the city is securely positioned from both a technical and business perspective to meet the demands of our rapidly changing future and community. And with that, thank you, and back to you, Ms. Bjorklund.
Thank you, Ms. Walters. This is the end of our presentation for the city budget. The next meeting will be on October 11th, which will be the first public hearing. Video for the Budget and Audit Board review and this study session will be on Lakewood Speaks for anyone who would like to view it in the future. And we received some questions prior to this presentation, which I'll read the questions and answers. And then I will turn it over to the Mayor Pro Tem Skilling. So I'm going to read the questions and answers so that everyone can hear what was asked and what the answers are. So this is yes. If you want to just leave it there, that would be fine. So the first question we received was from Mayor Paul. And his question is, I would like to know if we received the money from the sale of the Westland Town Center parking lot. If so, how can we put these dollars back into that area? So the answer is yes, approximately $1 million was received in April 2021. The funds were not designated for specific spending in that area. However, there is a project which is called West Colfax Art Line Improvements, although it's both west and east, is in the proposed 2022 budget of $800,000, which will have improvements in Ward 1, which is the area that was mentioned, and Ward 2. Economic Development and Community Resources have also been in discussions with the community on potential projects. Next, we had some questions from Councilor Abel. And the first question he had was in the CIPP, we have revenue sources. What do the acronyms stand for? So the first one is SRTS, which is Safety Routes to School Grant. CMPI, which is Community Planning and Implementation Grant. HSIP is Highway Safety Improvement Program Grant. LWCS is, actually, I think what you meant was LWCF, which is Land and Water Conservation Fund. And on page 308 in the budget book, there is a reference for abbreviations. Next question, could we have more information on revenue sharing agreements? are they, Laura, I think what you meant was LRA? Okay. And economic development related. Is the Rooney Road Valley Agreement involved, and with whom do we share revenue? So the answer is Rooney Valley is not involved, and the city has two revenue sharing agreements that is not LRA, which is Stevenson 1, which is half of a 2% sales tax share, Stevenson 2, which is half of a 2% tax share. And the revenue sharing agreement that you referenced did not include LRA. However, Lakewood does have LRA related revenue sharing agreements, and those are Belmar, which is 2/3 of 3%, in other words, 2%, sales tax waived, and Creekside has 100% of sales tax in excess of $1 million shared. Next question. On page 33, it appears none of the Bear Creek Park improvements would be flooded if the expanded water storage plan is pursued. Is that correct? Yes, is the answer. On page 43, Wright Street Park, does the $1.6 million include improvements, or is the cost of improvements included? Improvements are included in both 2022 and 2023 forecasts. On page 56, I thought council came to consensus in a study session a couple of years ago to float bonds in order to accomplish not only North Dry Gulch improvements, but those on Dry Gulch also as well, a number of other drainage issues citywide. Is this still the drawing board? Oh, it's still on the drawing board. Yes, is the answer. Selling bonds remains an option. Fund on hand are currently being used. The formal city council decision regarding bonds will be timely after on-hand funds are substantially spent down and before they are exhausted for the following reasons. Borrowing funds before they are needed would generate unnecessary interest expense. The Mile High Flood District, MHFD, funds cannot be committed to pay long-term debt services. And some financing tools require that the funds be utilized within a limited amount of time after being borrowed. Next, we had questions from Councillor Johnson, and her question was, or statement first, was, I understand we cut the city budget by $19 million in response to COVID. Initially, the city received $22 million CARES. Please tell me how much more has been given to the city and how much more we anticipate receiving. Answer. In 2020, revised and 2021 adopted budget, Lakewood reduced general fund expenses by $17 million. The city received $12.3 million in CARES, or also known as Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security funds in 2020 and were spent in 2020. The city received $10.8 million in 2021 for the American Rescue Plan funds and expected to receive $10.8 million in 2022. The last question we received was from Councillor Vincent. I was looking for the community action team members and did not see them. Are they part of the regular police officer line item? On page, answer, on page 266, they are included in the 231 full-time positions. So I will now turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Skilling for any additional questions and discussion before we move to the Lra budget.
Thank you, Ms. Bjorklund, and thank you to all of our presenters. Everyone did a fine job, very informative as always. I do have a hand up from Councillor Johnson, so let's start there. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. And Holly, I apologize. I actually meant to include this. How many PIFs are out there? Are there any TIFs? The number of them, and when do we expect those to run out?
I'm not sure if Robert's the right person to answer that question.
Okay.
Holly, I believe Robert is the right person to answer that question. And might we stop sharing the screen so people can see each other? Perfect, thank you. And Robert, I think he's on deck. If he's not able to answer that question tonight, we can sure have a thorough answer at least by the first reading, which is coming up in a couple weeks.
October 11th.
And I just have a comment at the very end, I believe, of Holly's presentation. She had a neighborhood connects or somebody that would reach out with the community and help them connect and answer questions. What was the name of that program again? I thought it was Holly that had it. And also the last criteria that you had of their job role and description is that they would be a direct connection between residents and Lakewood government. And that's nice, but also I think that's kind of a role that City Council has as well. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Thank you.
So it's Neighborhood Support Team is the name of the program.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and next we have Councillor Bita, who's also the chair of the Budget and Audit Committee. Councillor Bita.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to quickly bring to the attention of our council and also to the public who may be listening, page 20, which is the letter from our Budget and Audit Board, which outlines some of the changes that were made this year in the budget process and some of the other things that were done to try and streamline the budget process and make it a little bit easier to understand everything. So that's at page 20, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And thank you to Holly and the staff for their presentation and all the hard work that they have done to get our budget to this point. Thanks.
Okay, and thank you also to council who had submitted their questions well ahead of time. I think that was really helpful tonight. And Ms. Bjorklund and her team had the responses ready, which was definitely helpful. Mr. Smith, there was a question that was, I think it was the PIFs and the TIFs. So if you could, might as well address it since you're on the screen. Could you go ahead and address Councilor's questions on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The first question about PIFs. PIFs is an acronym that stands for Public Improvement Fees. There are 7 areas in the city of Lakewood that have PIFs associated with them. They look like a sales tax, they smell like a sales tax, they act like a sales tax, but they're not a sales tax. They are an improvement fee that goes back generally to the developer, although there are 7 of them, so there's some variations in those along the way, and they're collected at the point of purchase and added onto the total that a consumer would pay, and they generally range somewhere between 1% all the way up to 2.5%, which is what it is in Belmar over there. Happy to send council some more information on those PIFs if you would like. We also mentioned TIFs. TIFs is an acronym for Tax Increment Financing. And it gets a little confusing because the LRA collects increment or tax increment. That's just the TI of TIF. The TIF would be any financing mechanism where we use the increment, the tax increment collected, to pay back some kind of financing mechanism. And the most typical use of that is you go out and you get bonds for a project, you sell those bonds, and then you pay back the bonds via the increment collection over the future years. So we have increments in all of the LRA areas, and I believe that's what Councilmember Johnson is addressing, and I'm happy to do that as part of the LRA budget presentation. I'm going to go over each of the areas and talk about when each of those tax increment captures ends, so you'll know those years. And I think that's probably what you were getting at. So happy to do that within the budget presentation here shortly.
It's a heck of a segue, Mr. Smith. You could just start now. But before we do that, are there any additional questions for Ms. Bjorklund and her team before we move on to the second part of the presentation where we put on our LRA hats and go over that with Mr. Smith? And if anyone thinks of any questions at the end, we can certainly circle back. But all right, Mr. Smith, you were just saying something about an LRA budget.
I'd be happy to talk about the LRA budget. If you take a real close look at the LRA budget, you see the cover on your screen. Right now, I'm holding up the city's budget over in this hand, and then I'm holding up the LRA budget. The differences are subtle, but you may be able to pick up on some differences immediately between these two budgets. Of course, the LRA budget is much smaller. It's about 15, 20 pages altogether. Just so you know, we do have to have a separate meeting of the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority on the 25th of October, and that will be to approve a resolution to approve the budget. Tonight, the finance department's been so kind to me to allow me to kind of tuck in behind this meeting here so that I can give you a little bit of information about it in the study session. But for the LRA budget, only one public hearing is required. 2 are required for the city budget, only 1 for the LRA budget. That'll happen on the 25th. And it's not required to do the study session, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyways and talk just a little bit about what's in that 15, 20 page budget. And Mr. Rome, if you would move the slide forward here, I will chat about this. And if you push that button, so that, yeah, there you go. That block's coming down. Basically, there are 3 things that are kind of dominating or controlling or compelling us in the LRA over the next couple of years. The first one is the potential for that LRA board expansion. There are 4 areas altogether. We'll talk about those in a moment, but that potential board expansion, we talked about that at a meeting of the LRA and the City Council on August the 8th. Folks said, hey, let's bring that forward to talk about the expansion, and we will be doing that. Our hope is to do that by the end of the year. We're working with our attorneys to get all the I's dotted and T's crossed. With the Lakewood Development Authority oversees 4 different urban renewal areas. We often talk about the 2 near Belmar as kind of one. We've done that in the past. It's now time to make certain that we separate those because there's about a 2-year lag between those 2 areas. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But essentially, the state statute gives a 25-year time clock to capture the increment taxes, and those clocks are winding down. So all 4 of those areas will be winding down in the next few years. The Colfax LRA area or your urban renewal area, that one's the longest running. It doesn't run out until 2030. Other ones are here in the next couple of years, and again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. The third element, Mr. Rome, if you wouldn't mind pushing that so the block comes up on there, is really that these areas are going to complete the terms of their increment capture in the next few years. And that means that we now just need to start thinking as the LRA board about winding down these areas and making sure that all of the revenues that have been collected over that 25-year period are expended within those urban renewal areas. Just a real key point here, that dollars that are collected in a specific area have to be expended within that specific area. So we can't collect dollars in the Alameda corridor and then spend them in the Colfax corridor. We can only take the dollars in the Colfax corridor and spend them in the Colfax corridor, or inversely. And the city manager, my boss's boss, actually, Kathy Hodson, has challenged the economic development team. We're among the principal staff for the LRA. She's challenged us to find ways to effectively allocate significant funds to mitigate blight in our urban renewal area. So that's specifically where we're going to be stepping up our game in working not just with our traditional wheelhouse, which is businesses, but we're going to be stepping up our game and working with neighbors and residents in order to develop those plans for the blight mitigation and to expend those dollars in those areas. And this will help facilitate the neighborhood support team efforts that you saw mentioned in an earlier slide during the city budget presentation. So we're hoping to leverage our partners in the Colfax organizations and the Alameda corridor organizations to help us interface with all of the stakeholders in the community and to develop those plans. And then as we're coming forward in the budget, we'll be doing budget exceptions for those plans because we don't know exactly what those are going to look like yet. So they're not included in the budget that you're seeing here. The budget that you're seeing in this 15, 20-page document, that's a workman's budget, if you will. It's our organizational budget, things that we do on a regular basis. So with that, let me talk a little bit about each of the areas. Mr. Rome, if you move the slide forward just one spot. The first of our areas is the West Alameda Corridor Reinvestment Area 1. That's the bulk of the Alameda corridor. We'll talk a little bit about that. What you're seeing right there is the Alameda Streetscape project from a drone footage, and you can see very wide areas of landscaping and sidewalks and whatnot. We have this tremendous advantage in the Alameda corridor in that the right-of-way to either side of the road, very wide, very broad, and we were able to do this project because we have access to that right-of-way. Not so much up in Colfax, it has a more traditional right-of-way, but let's talk just a little bit more. Mr. Rome, if you'd advance it. Here's some information about the West Alameda corridor area. It's about 483 acres altogether. If you look at the map to the right, you can tell that it's not labeled, but on the very far right, that dark gray area, that's Denver. So that first street that you see, that's Sheridan. That's the street furthest to the right. You can see that's where the Alameda corridor begins in that blue area with the red boundary around it. That's the Alameda Corridor Reinvestment Area number 1, goes all the way out to the west at Belmar Park. And the Alameda Streetscape project is the kind of the predominant project over the last couple of years. This actually ends in 2023. We'll wind up capturing the taxes for 2023 and 2024. But at that point, the increment capture will end and the LRA will continue into the future. The area will continue into the future, but that increment capture, that revenue stream will no longer be available to us. In this particular corridor, we really need to think about, we spent a lot of time thinking about how it interfaces with Belmar, and that's at the Wadsworth intersection. That's the big street that you see about a third of the way in from the left on there. What we really want to be able to do in terms of thinking about this project here is really to think about the entirety of the area, but mostly from Sheridan out to Belmar Park. So basically putting Sheridan in the front and talking about all of the things that we might want to get done here the next couple of years. If you advance the slide, Mr. Rome, we'll talk about the next area. This is the next one to where the increment will expire. It's the Colfax Wadsworth Reinvestment Area. It's where the Super Walmart is. A lot of folks remember the old Kmart store that this Walmart replaced. They also remember that there was a lot of drainage issues that were taken care of. A lot of that creek bed through there, a lot of drainage things were taken care of in there, and we're working on paying those off, and we should be able to pay them off by the time we finish it. If you'd advance the slide, Mr. Rome, you'll see that there are about 32 acres in there. It's really the proper area. On the map there, you can see that north-south, very strong line, about a quarter of the way in from the left. That's Wadsworth. Colfax is at the bottom of that blue shaded area. And that blue shaded area is a lot of times what we refer to as Creekside, because it's the Creekside Shopping Center out there. That one, the increment capture will end in 2024. We'll go on to collect the $2024 in 2025 and expend all of those dollars in there. Next one, Mr. Rome. That's the West Alameda Corridor Reinvestment Area number 2. That's what most folks think of as Belmar. It's Belmar proper, if you will, and it's being indicated here by that fabulous Hyatt House project that's in Belmar. If you'd advance one more time, Mr. Rome. You see that there's about 106 acres involved there. You take a look at the map on the right, the very strong line that's going north to south, top of the map down to the bottom, that's Wadsworth. That very strong line going east to west, about a third of the way in from the top. That's Alameda, and then you see the area that is this reinvestment area number 2. The year that this increment is complete in 2025, and we'll be moving into 2026 with the collections on that area. And of course, Belmar is the predominant project there. Advance the slide if you would, Mr. Rome. Last area that we're going to talk about is the West Colfax Avenue Corridor Reinvestment Area. You can see on the left the Oak Street Station improvements. That's a loan project that we borrowed some dollars in order to affect those changes, that art, that the benches, all of the amenities that are in the Oak Street Station for the West Line. And then, of course, on the right is the Wadsworth Station as well. If you'd advance it one more time, Mr. Rome. You see how that one comes together. That's 813 acres. So if you've been keeping track of all of those acreages that are in here, this one's at least twice as big as our next largest area. Was adopted in 2005, and the year the increment capture is complete is 2030. We'll collect those dollars in 2031. The station betterment projects are the ones that are predominant in the area. And this is the area where I think we're going to get the most traction in terms of wanting to do those projects, support that neighborhood support effort, and really move forward with that. We want to look at this area very successfully, the entirety of the area, but we really want to frame it up as being from Sims, which you see over there on the left, to Sheridan. Very often it gets referred to the other way, and that might sound like a subtle difference between those two, but really start thinking about what do we do Sims headed east, and we will continue, of course, with the projects that we've got on the books from already in that area. And with that, I will close out that discussion. Be happy to take on questions, but bring you back to this budget study session cover on there. And as I said, I'll wrap it up here. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Before we go to any further questions for the public input portion, let me just go over that phone number again, 253-215-8782, webinar ID 950-3326-8279. Press pound after entering the webinar ID and pound once more to join the meeting. So if you are with us in the queue, if you wouldn't mind hitting *9 if you wish to speak, so that we can alert Mr. Rome that when it is time to do public comment, we've got you all ready to go. So with that, council, comments, questions? If we could take the shared screen off, would be fantastic. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, but let me reiterate, we do have 2 more hearings on the budget. We have the first, those are in October. I believe those are October 11th and October 25th. Those are the consecutive hearings, Ms. Hodson.
That's accurate. The 11th is first reading and the 25th is second and final reading, and public hearings for both.
So and thank you for that. So if council has any additional questions between now and those hearings, certainly get those in again. And we will certainly ask those questions at the next hearing if they're not answered before then. Okay, well, let's go to, I'm going to open public comment and ask Mr. Rome if we have any hands up. I see one.
Yes, that's Joshua Comden.
Okay, Mr. Comden.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Joshua Comden. I'm in Ward 1.
Good evening.
Yeah, and I watched the presentation. It was very, very nice. I definitely like the neighborhood support team idea. I love anything to build relationships between neighbors and get neighbors to help neighbors. So I am really encouraged that is, and I hope it's successful, and I hope it expands if successful. I live across the street from Wright Street Park, so I'm very excited to see those improvements, and I would love to be involved because it was mentioned that would love community input on that, so I think that's really cool. And I saw that there's an addition to Walker Branch Park. I go there quite often, and so I'm very happy to see that too. So, yes, thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Comden. Appreciate those comments. While we wait for anybody else to dial in, just want to reiterate thank you to Mr. Smith for his presentation. And thank you again to Ms. Bjorklund and her team and Ms. Hodson. I don't see anyone else, Mr. Rome, unless you do.
I do not.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and close public comment. And again, thank you to all the staff. Thank you to council for the questions. This is the time of the night that we usually do committee updates. I'm not sure how many committee meetings have been going on, but I will start with any committee chairs that have a committee report. As I suspected, not many committee meetings. Everyone has been entrenched in other things, which is great. And I don't have a report from Development Dialogue Committee. We did have a date. We did have to reschedule that. So it's still to be determined on the next date for that. And speaking of committees, thank you, Mr. Bede. I know that you have some resident members on that. I don't know if they're on the phone call tonight or not, but let's give a shout out to the residents that make up that board, as well as the council members that are on there. Mr. Bede, let me unmute you, or try to unmute you. If you could unmute yourself, that would be great. There you go.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, our three citizen, we call them citizen members, are Christopher Scott, David Weichman, and Marlon McDaniel. And they're play a big role in our budget and audit board. And I want to thank them for all of their efforts in this process.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and thank you to all of them. And with that, thank you, Council, for the great meeting tonight. And with that, we will see you next Monday, and we will adjourn this study session.